whether or not it was Osama bin Laden, I don't, remember if this was the first time I actually heard his name, but we had other incidents. You had Ari Halberstam shot and killed along with 2 or 3 other students, again by a Palestinian in 1994. In 1994, you had this Jewish community center bombed in Argentina. That put us on high alert. Don may remember this. I asked them to put, and I got the advice from somebody in the bomb squad, fill sanitation trucks with sand. We stationed them around the Israeli mission to the UN and their other properties, 2 other properties in Manhattan. And then we had the Empire State Building shooting in 1997. So, the hairs on the back of my head were already, raised up for the possibility of terrorism in the city. And I knew we were going to have something.
And I'll add one more. 1997, we get the letter bombs at the United Nations. Yep. We also get the attempted bombing of the Atlantic Avenue subway in July of 1997. Right. Yes. Let's backtrack as well. 1990, where it all began, November 5th, 1990, Meir Kahane gets gunned down. The Jewish rabbi gunned down by El Said Nosser, who, as I covered in previous episodes, was later linked to this bombing. And guess who paid for his defense fund? Osama bin Laden.
There you go.
So it really began back then in 90. If you want to stretch it that farther back.
We're getting a lot of good face-to-face information from John O'Neill. So I would sit with him. We'd have a cigar, after business hours. John was terrific. John Miller was another good guy to talk to.
Oh, yeah.
He was a friend because he had been in the department. And then you had Mike McCann, the chief of security at the UN. Solid guy, and he had contacts. The Secret Service, were close with us. Back in the day, we had, something. And not a lot of it was actionable, but at least, we could do some things. We ordered a citywide intelligence plan. We estimated which were the likely targets in the city, what would we do, what do we need, et cetera, et cetera. All that started as a result of these different
I came up to the street and saw that iconic picture. When I went down, there was a couple of fire trucks. When I came up, it was you had to squeeze in between trucks to get down that street. So Ronnie stopped by the firehouse, see how everybody was doing. And we're sitting at the kitchen table, and he says, "There's a group called Al-Qaeda," and he said, and I guess from the military, he said, nobody wants to hear us. He said, but this is a group called Al-Qaeda, and he said what they just tried to do was knock that building over by taking its foundation out. And when this group doesn't accomplish what they want to do, they will come back and hit that same target when it's convenient for them. And sure enough, 8 years later, they hit that target. Ronnie was the only fire marshal that made it way up into the building, and he was the only fire marshal that got killed that day. And he was the one warning us about Al-Qaeda 8 years.
A response like this, from an EMS perspective, we start out by operating from the outside, and we're doing 2 things. First of all, we're gathering patients that are already outside, so they're there. So we're not going to go past them. We start dealing with the patients that are outside and gathering them. And then we have patients that are brought out to us by the rescue forces. So that's the firefighters and police emergency service, Port Authority, and anybody else who's bringing patients out to us. So at the outset of this incident, we were not operating deeply in these buildings. We're at the lobby level, and patients were coming to us, and we had more than we could handle just with that. It was a while before we made entry into the building. So we didn't have an immediate interaction with rescue folks except in the handoff of patients. So we weren't engaged with them initially going up into the building. We weren't doing that coordination. We were managing the patients as they came out to us.
Before I get to Chief Anemone, there is the aspect of egress that you mentioned earlier to get patients out to the nearest hospitals as soon as possible. But there's also the need, given the large magnitude of patients coming out to you, for triages. How did you go about setting up those?
Well, very interesting. So, well, first, it should be said that EMS in New York City, as probably many large city EMS agencies, have a lot of experience with this sort of mass casualty thing. And whether it's a natural disaster or a building fire or a terrorist attack or anything else that might come along. So we in New York City had years of experience using the incident command system, which we piloted at Third Service Agency Incident Command System in the mid 1980s. And so we had been using that for a while. And we had a lot of practice in terms of organizing these large responses. Every year we did major events like the New York City Marathon, where we treated, depending on the weather, could be hundreds of patients at a time in a day event. So our troops and certainly our officers, our supervisors, had a lot of experience in organizing this kind of response and managing it. That said, we had never had anything like this, and I think none of us had ever had anything like this event. But we had the groundwork laid for responding to a big event. And in fact, it's interesting, as I was reflecting on 93, preparing for this, I thought of how that was a great preparation for 2001, Act 2.
It was Salome, not Ramsey Yosef. It was Salome.
Mohammed Salome.
Right, who rented the van and drove it. He was told, you go to the airport, you'll get on a plane, you fly back to Antwerp. Well, you'll fly to Antwerp, Belgium, where somebody will meet you and give you another passport and ID, and give you a ticket to fly back to Egypt, and you'll disappear in the lower valley of Egypt, with his cohorts. That was the plan. But he was $400 short because the bad guys on the other end, they ordered him the cheapest possible ticket you can get, which is for that of a child. It's almost comical. So he realizes he's $400 short. He can't go back to the mosque. He can't go back to any of the apartments or the safe houses. Everybody's on their own, trying to get out of the country. So he remembers, I got this receipt. I'm going to go back and I'm going to report it stolen, and that's how I'm going to get my money, and I'm going to the airport. So the way things were back in the day, he goes to the Ryder rental van company where he rented it in Jersey, and there's a sharp young college guy there, and he notifies the police, the FBI, and they send a team over there immediately. They tell him, we'll be glad to give you the money, but you have to go to the local police department and you have to file a missing stolen vehicle report. So he goes to the Jersey City Police, and he's like, I'm in a hurry, this, that. Listen, sit your butt over there and be quiet, and you're like number 12. You wait your turn. Meanwhile, the Joint Terrorist Task Force went there. They interviewed the fellow from the rental agency, and they put cameras and listening devices in. He comes back, and he's got the paperwork, and they go through this whole litany. Are you Mohammed Salome? Did you rent this van? Blah, 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 blah. And they got him. They got him cold. But now nobody's going to collar him, because remember, back in that moment, we wanted to see where he was going to go. He was going to hook up with, other people that were known or unknown. So they were going to do surveillance on him. Half a block away, Eyewitness News with a news crew with the microwave antenna going up. They're broadcasting live. They were monitoring the task force's radio frequencies. And they're saying, we have a suspect in the case, a terrorist, and the FBI Joint Terrorist Task Force with New York City detectives are about to make an arrest. And everybody was like, oh my God, can't believe this. So he comes walking out, and there's the news crew filming. I mean, you couldn't make this stuff up. So they had to collar him on the spot. And that's the reason he went back for that money.